Once you're familiar with the basic uses of apostrophes, namely to show possession or contraction, you can move on to some of the trickier cases. And we'll start here with singular nouns that end in s. So singular nouns that end in s. As you can see from the examples here, there's quite a bit of variation. So the first one ends in an s and an apostrophe, whereas the other ones have an extra s after the apostrophe. Why is that? Well, everything has to do with how awkward it sounds to say it. If you were to say Moses' sailboat, you can hear that that sounds quite awkward, whereas it's much easier to say Chris's nephew or the boss's car, even though in the last case the boss already has a whole bunch of s's. The basic idea then is if it sounds awkward to say it, you can add just the apostrophe and not the s, but we'll try to unpack that a little bit in what follows to get at some more specific rules that can guide us. Now that we have a general approach for dealing with singular nouns that end in s, we can apply some more specific rules as well. So first of all, our first two examples are of classical names. And we could add other examples too. We could talk about Jesus or Barnabas. And in these cases, if we end with the s, then we can add just the apostrophe. But these two examples also show another rule, which is that if that final sound ends in us or ease, as in Herodotus or Socrates, then it also qualifies for that kind of awkward sound where we add just the apostrophe and not the apostrophe and the s. Our next example is of a phrase that ends in sake. So if you say for goodness sake or for conscience sake, normally you would not say for goodness sake. So again, we can add just the apostrophe and not the s. The next example, just to continue here, is of nouns that are the same in the singular and the plural. So in this case, series is a noun that's the same whether it's one series or multiple series, and as a result we add just the apostrophe and not the s. You can probably understand why. Already in the plural, if it ends in s, we add just the apostrophe, so it makes sense to kind of make it the same for the singular version. And then the last example here is of organizations or place names that end in s. You are also allowed in this case to add just the apostrophe and not the s. And for the United States, it makes complete sense because there are multiple states, and even though the singular noun is United States, we sort of are reminded of the number of states here. And most people would not say the United States' veto. So listen for it, try to figure out if it sounds awkward or not, and then try to apply some of these specific rules as well. And if you're going to publish a book or have some other form of publication, you may find specific rules or guidelines that go with the publishing house or with the website or newspaper or whatever you're working for. Try to follow those, but they're going to probably use some of these criteria that we have talked about here as well. And then whatever they use, try just to be consistent in your approach. And really, consistency is the key to a good sense of style, I think, in this instance. Another place where apostrophes are a little bit tricky is with groups of things. So in the first example here, we have what's called a compound noun. And the apostrophe and the s go at the very end. So sister-in-law's home. You don't have to add an apostrophe earlier as well. So no apostrophe there, and another example would be something like somebody else's. You would not say somebody's else's. Just add the apostrophe and the s at the very end. Same thing goes for what's called joint possession, which in some cases may be a criminal offense. So joint possession. This is where two people own something in common. So the wedding here belongs to Kate and it belongs to John. Presumably they're getting married to each other and they share the wedding in common. In that case, you add the apostrophe and the s just at the very end. But it's also possible that the two nouns in question, the two subjects here, are owning something separately. So let's say that John and Kate have separate idea for their honeymoon plans. So John wants to go to Hawaii and Kate does not, let's say. In that case, instead of wedding here, we would put John and Kate's honeymoon plans, and we would have to say John's and Kate's because they have separate plans. So for joint possession, just double check if the noun goes with both of them collectively or if it goes with them separately. Let's look at one more instance where the apostrophe causes some trouble. And this is with forming plurals. So normally you're not allowed to form plurals with the apostrophe. In fact, this is sometimes called the grocer's apostrophe. And the reason for that is that in supermarkets, grocery stores, you may see plurals formed with the apostrophe. So you might want to buy some bananas, and the bananas are spelt with an apostrophe S, which of course is incorrect. But sometimes we are allowed to break this rule that we cannot form the plural with an apostrophe. And I'll give you some examples here. So with letters or numbers, as you are pluralizing them, so let's say you want to say you should dot your I's and cross your T's, then unless you put the apostrophe in there, it's going to be really hard for people to see what you're talking about. Without the apostrophe, it would just say is and ts, and that would make no sense. Same thing with I count by ones and twos. You can also do this for decades, so you could say 1980s if you wanted to, although with decades often the apostrophe drops out, and that's becoming much more common. And you can also do it with certain words. So if you're drawing attention to a word, italicizing it as well, then you can say, for instance, Canadians use lots of A's in their speech. And because you're drawing attention to the word and you're pluralizing it, you can add that apostrophe at the end. So these are fairly rare exceptions. And there's one more thing to notice, which is that when you do this sort of thing, when you're drawing attention to a particular word, letter, or number, so all three of these cases, ignoring the decades one here, you should italicize the letter, number, or word, but not the apostrophe and the S. So that gets a little bit tricky. Just make sure you add italics for everything that's part of that except for the apostrophe S. And that's it for tricky cases of apostrophe use. Hopefully you found this useful. Try some of the exercises on the website as well, and I think over time it will get definitely a lot easier.